When someone accuses you, criticizes you, or launches a personal attack, the instinct to defend yourself is almost irresistible. It is human nature to want to correct the record, to explain your true intentions, to show that the other person is wrong. But Niccolò Machiavelli, the master of power, perception, and control, would warn you that this very instinct is the first step toward your downfall. Defense feels like strength in the moment. You believe you are standing your ground, showing that you are not afraid to answer. But in the eyes of the audience, and in the cold logic of power, every word of defense works against you. It confirms that the attack was worth making, that you take it seriously, and that you are willing to engage on the terms set by your enemy. In short, you are no longer in control. Machiavelli understood that power is as much about perception as it is about reality. In The Prince, he repeatedly emphasizes that appearances shape political fortunes far more than truth does. Once you step into the role of the accused, you have already accepted a lower position in the hierarchy. You have implicitly admitted that the attacker's frame is valid, and now you must justify yourself within it. This is the beginning of defeat. Defending yourself does three dangerous things. First, it legitimizes the accusation. Even if you prove every point false, you have shown that the accusation was significant enough to deserve a response. Second, it shifts the power dynamic. You are now reacting rather than acting. You have ceded the initiative. Third, it trains others to see you as someone who can be put on trial, someone whose time, energy, and dignity can be consumed by the agendas of others. Machiavelli would say, "The moment you defend, you are no longer the ruler of the situation. You are the subject. And subjects do not dictate the terms of the conversation, they answer to them." Why is this such a critical point? Because in politics, business, and personal life, the one who controls the terms of the interaction controls the outcome. When you defend yourself, you are implicitly agreeing that the central question is whether you are guilty or innocent of the charge. But that is the wrong question. The real question, the question a true strategist forces into the spotlight, is whether the accuser has the right, the credibility, or the standing to make the attack in the first place. Power is not about fighting every battle. It is about choosing which battlegrounds even exist. By defending yourself, you accept their battlefield. And once you fight on their battlefield, you fight by their rules. Consider the great political operators of history, from Renaissance rulers to modern leaders. The most successful rarely explain themselves. They understood that silence, dismissal, or redirection keeps them in the dominant position. When they did respond, it was not with explanations but with counterattacks or reframing. The purpose was never to prove innocence, but to make the accuser look small, misguided, or irrelevant. Machiavelli's genius lies in recognizing that power flows toward those who appear untouchable. The moment you engage in defense, you appear touchable. You show that your reputation can be pulled into question, that your attention can be hijacked, that you can be forced to account for yourself. This is blood in the water. This is not to say that you must ignore every challenge. Strategic silence is not passive. It is an active choice to withhold validation from an attack. Sometimes you may respond, but when you do, the response should not be on their terms. The goal is to flip the frame, to refuse the role of the accused entirely, and to reposition yourself as the one asking the questions, defining the narrative, and forcing others to respond. In the Machiavellian view, the moment you defend yourself, you have already surrendered the high ground. The master of power refuses the role of the defendant. He is the judge, the narrator, the one who decides what the story is about. And in that story, the attacker is either ignored into irrelevance or destroyed by the weight of their own overreach. Defense is defeat, not because it is morally wrong or inherently weak, but because it shifts the balance of control. In a world where perception often becomes reality, the way you handle an attack is not just about winning the moment. It is about shaping the field on which all future encounters will take place. To follow Machiavelli's counsel is to discipline your instincts. It is to resist the urge to explain and instead ask, who benefits from me speaking right now? Whose terms am I accepting if I answer? And most importantly, how can I turn this moment from their trial of me into my trial of them? That is the essence of why defense is defeat, and why, if you wish to hold power, you must master the art of never being the one on trial. When you step into the role of the defendant, whether in a political arena, a business meeting, or a personal relationship, you enter a psychological trap that is far more dangerous than it appears. At first, it may feel noble to clear your name or set the record straight. You may believe you are demonstrating transparency, honesty, or courage. But in the ruthless theater of human interaction, these virtues can be interpreted as signs of weakness, insecurity, and lack of control. Playing the defendant creates a subtle but devastating shift in perception. The audience, whether it is a crowd, a boardroom, or a circle of friends, no longer sees you as a leader or equal. They see you as someone who must answer for themselves, someone whose legitimacy is being questioned. Once this perception takes hold, every word you say will be filtered through the lens of suspicion. Even your strongest arguments can be dismissed as self-serving. Psychologically, the act of defending yourself sends out an unspoken message. The accuser has the right to demand answers from me. This alone elevates the accuser's status and authority in the eyes of others. In that moment, they become the one with the power to interrogate, and you become the one who must justify your existence. Humans are wired to respond to status cues. The mere fact that you are explaining yourself signals a drop in your rank. Think of courtroom dynamics. The defendant sits in a lower position, waits for permission to speak, and must answer questions dictated by others. No matter how persuasive the defense, the psychological frame remains fixed. The defendant is on trial. Once you are trapped in this frame, every interaction becomes reactive. You are no longer setting the agenda, you are responding to it. This loss of initiative is lethal in power dynamics. People rarely remember the details of arguments, but they remember who appeared in control. If you are always in the position of answering rather than questioning, you are silently training everyone to see you as subordinate. The trap deepens because defending yourself often requires providing context, explanations, and justifications, which, paradoxically, can create new openings for attack. The more you speak, the more material you give your opponent to twist, reinterpret, or use against you. Your very effort to close the case may end up widening it. Machiavelli would warn that this is not merely a matter of words, it is a matter of image. In The Prince, he stresses that rulers must appear strong, decisive, and untouchable. The defendant's role, however, is built on the opposite qualities: vulnerability, uncertainty, and dependence on the judgment of others. Once you inhabit this role, even briefly, you give up the aura of inevitability that sustains authority. There is another, more insidious psychological effect. The defensive mindset begins to take root internally. The more you justify yourself to others, the more you begin to justify yourself to yourself. This internal dialogue shifts your focus from advancing your goals to protecting your reputation. Over time, this defensive orientation erodes confidence and makes you hypersensitive to criticism, a perfect condition for your enemies to exploit. Breaking free from this trap requires more than simply refusing to answer attacks. It requires a conscious rejection of the entire frame. You must stop thinking of yourself as someone who can be put on trial in the first place. Instead of reacting to accusations, you redirect attention to the accuser's credibility, motives, or competence. You force them to explain themselves, placing them in the very position they intended for you. The master strategist knows that the battlefield of perception is where most victories are won or lost. By never accepting the role of the defendant, you deny your enemies the advantage they seek. You maintain the posture of authority, ensuring that even when under attack, you are the one controlling the rhythm and direction of the engagement. To avoid the psychological trap, you must internalize a simple principle. It is not your job to prove your worth to those who attack you. Your job is to decide which battles are worth fighting, and to fight them only on ground you have chosen. If you must respond, respond as a challenger, not as a defendant. Ask questions that force the other side onto the back foot. Reframe the discussion so that they are the one under scrutiny. In the end, the most dangerous part of playing the defendant is not the risk of losing the argument. It is the risk of losing your position in the hierarchy of perception. Once people see you as someone who can be judged and questioned, they will never look at you the same way again. The Machiavellian path demands that you guard your image of strength as fiercely as your actual power. To do that, you must refuse to play their game entirely. When an opponent strikes with accusations, criticism, or insinuations, most people instinctively try to block the blow. They either deny, explain, or counter with justifications. But Machiavelli's wisdom, echoed by strategists, negotiators, and military tacticians, teaches us that the most powerful move is not to block, but to take the opponent's weapon and turn it back on them. Reframing the attack means refusing to accept the premise on which it stands. Every accusation is built on a certain frame, an implied context in which you are the wrongdoer, the incompetent, or the one at fault. If you accept that context, you're already fighting uphill. Your words may be clever, your defense airtight, but you're still playing on their field, under their rules. Instead, the Machiavellian mind seeks to alter the field itself. This requires quick thinking, but more importantly, it requires a deep understanding of perception. The attack is only effective if the audience shares the attacker's frame. Your mission is to break that frame and replace it with one that works in your favor. Consider a public accusation. Someone claims you acted recklessly in making a decision. The natural defensive move is to explain your reasoning, but reframing changes the dynamic. What's truly reckless is doing nothing in the face of a problem. I took action because that's what leadership demands. Now, the attack becomes an opportunity to present yourself as decisive rather than negligent. Reframing works because human beings are narrative-driven. We do not store facts in isolation, we connect them into stories. Whoever controls the story controls the interpretation. When you reframe, you seize authorship of the narrative. The accuser may have set the stage, but you rewrite the script. This tactic can take many forms. Sometimes it means redefining the terms. If they call you arrogant, you can frame it as confident in my vision. If they call you stubborn, you can call it steadfast under pressure. Other times, reframing means questioning the accuser's motives. Why bring this up now? Whose interest does this serve? By shifting the spotlight, you force the audience to wonder about the integrity of the attacker, not yours. The most advanced form of reframing turns the attack into evidence for your strength. Suppose someone accuses you of being ruthless. You could reply, "Yes, I am ruthless, toward inefficiency, toward waste, toward anything that holds us back. And I will never apologize for that." In one stroke, you accept the label but change its moral weight. What was meant to be a flaw becomes a badge of honor. Reframing also disrupts the attacker's rhythm. Most people who launch an attack expect a certain reaction: denial, apology, or emotional outburst. When you instead redirect the conversation entirely, you throw them off balance. They are forced to respond to your narrative, and in doing so, they risk looking defensive themselves. There is a psychological elegance to this maneuver. It is not about lying or twisting the truth. It is about shifting the lens through which the truth is viewed. The same event can look like a disaster or a triumph depending on the frame. Machiavelli understood that perception often outweighs reality in matters of power. By reframing, you manipulate perception without needing to alter the facts. Yet, reframing is not something you improvise carelessly. It demands preparation and practice. You must know the likely lines of attack against you, anticipate them, and craft frames that neutralize or reverse them. The best reframes are simple, memorable, and emotionally resonant. They make the audience feel that your interpretation was obvious all along. Importantly, reframing does not mean over-explaining. A reframe should be crisp and assertive, not a meandering explanation. The more words you use, the greater the risk of slipping back into defense. Deliver your reframe as if you are setting the record straight for everyone's benefit, not pleading your case. One of the hidden powers of reframing is that it subtly asserts dominance. By redefining the terms of the conversation, you demonstrate that you are the one in control. This sends a signal to the audience that you cannot be cornered or made small by an attack. It shows resilience, adaptability, and the ability to turn adversity into advantage. Ultimately, reframing is the art of refusing to be defined by others. When someone tries to paint you into a corner, you break down the walls and redraw the space entirely. You deny your opponents the satisfaction of seeing you trapped in their narrative. Instead, you take their words, their accusations, and their assumptions, and forge them into tools for your own purpose. In the Machiavellian playbook, every attack contains within it the seed of opportunity. The skill lies in seeing that seed, cultivating it, and letting it grow into a weapon they never expected you to wield. When you master reframing, you do not just survive attacks, you thrive on them, turning each one into a public demonstration of your strength. In the theater of confrontation, words are the obvious weapons. Most people reach for them instinctively, eager to fire back, to argue, to prove themselves right. Yet Machiavelli understood that sometimes the deadliest strike is the one you never deliver. Silence, when used with precision, can humiliate more deeply than any insult. Coupled with a measured air of contempt, it becomes an art form, one that erodes your opponent's power while amplifying your own. Strategic silence is not passive. It is an active decision to withhold your voice, to refuse to participate in the performance your opponent is trying to stage. Every attack, every accusation, is an invitation to a particular game. By speaking, you accept their rules. By remaining silent, you refuse the game entirely. And in doing so, you force your opponent into an awkward, unbalanced position. The brilliance of silence lies in what it implies. People project meaning onto the absence of words, often imagining far more than you could ever say aloud. When you meet an accusation with silence and a calm, unreadable expression, the audience starts to wonder, why isn't he defending himself? Does he know something we don't? Is the accusation too ridiculous to acknowledge? Their curiosity becomes your shield. Cold contempt takes silence one step further. It's not just the absence of words, but the presence of an unspoken judgment, a quiet but unmistakable message that the accuser's words are beneath your dignity. It is the subtle tightening of the jaw, the faint smirk, the deliberate turning away. It is signaling, without saying it, that the attack is so trivial it doesn't merit your attention. Why is this so effective? Because it flips the emotional burden. When you respond with words, you carry the burden of explanation. When you respond with contemptuous silence, the burden shifts to your opponent. They feel compelled to fill the void, to justify themselves, to escalate in search of a reaction. And the more they escalate, the more desperate they appear. In political arenas, courtrooms, or corporate boardrooms, seasoned operators use this technique to devastating effect. A rival makes a sharp accusation. The target simply looks at them, expressionless, perhaps with the faintest trace of a knowing smile. The silence stretches. The accuser grows uncomfortable, their certainty wavering. Soon, it is they who begin to stumble over their words, attempting to explain and re-explain what was once a sharp point. Machiavelli would point out that silence and contempt deny your opponent legitimacy. To defend is to acknowledge the court they've created, to become the defendant in a trial you never agreed to. Silence refuses to enter that courtroom at all. Contempt makes the entire proceeding look foolish. You are not on trial, you are the arbiter, watching from above. Of course, this tactic demands control over your own emotions. The urge to reply, to correct, to defend is powerful. Strategic silence requires discipline. You must resist the temptation to fill the air. In heated moments, this restraint becomes a visible display of strength, signaling that you are unshaken, even amused. There is also a rhythm to using silence effectively. Too much of it, and you risk seeming evasive. Too little, and it loses its sting. The most potent silences are carefully placed, immediately after an attack, in the middle of a heated exchange, or as the final word that isn't spoken. Timing, as with all power plays, is everything. Cold contempt, meanwhile, is a blade that must be drawn with subtlety. Overdo it, and you risk appearing arrogant in a way that alienates the audience. The contempt must be controlled, almost restrained, just enough for the target to feel its chill, and for the audience to sense it without perceiving you as petty. The psychological mechanics of this strategy are rooted in human insecurity. People fear being ignored because it threatens their sense of significance. When someone attacks you and you respond with silence, you are telling them, and everyone watching, that they are not worth your time. When you pair that with a slight air of disdain, you leave them feeling small. In some cases, the silence itself becomes the story. Observers will talk about how you didn't even bother to answer, how your calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the other's agitation. The absence of reaction becomes a public demonstration of control, a kind of power that no amount of clever rhetoric can match. Strategic silence and cold contempt are not for every battle. They work best when you hold a position of relative strength, or when the attack is so flimsy that engaging with it would elevate it. Used wisely, they can turn an aggressive confrontation into a one-sided display of dominance, with you firmly in command. In the Machiavellian world of power, not all victories are won with a sword in hand. Some are won with the quiet refusal to draw it at all, letting your opponent's own momentum carry them into defeat. Silence, laced with contempt, is a reminder that sometimes the most crushing blow is delivered without a single word. In the arena of power, the side that frames the discussion controls the battle. If you are defending, you are already behind. The essence of Machiavellian strategy is to shift the burden, to move your opponent from attacker to defender, from confident aggressor to scrambling apologist. This shift is not about reacting faster, but about making them react to you. When you force your opponent onto the defensive, you reverse the psychological current of the exchange. Suddenly, they must explain, justify, and reassure. The moment they begin explaining, they are signaling to everyone that their position is under threat. Their energy drains into damage control, and you reclaim the high ground. One of the most direct ways to make this shift is to question their premise. If they accuse you of a misstep, respond not with a denial, but with a challenge to their authority or credibility. Interesting claim. On what basis are you making that? This single move flips the spotlight. Now they must provide proof. They must defend their own logic. You can also reframe the attack as evidence of their weakness. If they seem desperate to corner you, ask, calmly and with a touch of curiosity, why they are so invested in undermining you. This reframes them as insecure or obsessed, planting doubt in the minds of the audience. A subtle shift in perception can erode their credibility faster than any counterargument. Another Machiavellian technique is the counterattack, but not in the form of heated retaliation. Instead, it's a composed redirection that exposes vulnerabilities they did not expect to reveal. If someone questions your integrity, for example, you might calmly recall an instance in which their own actions were questionable. You are not defending, you are presenting evidence that tilts the moral balance against them. Timing is critical. The counter move should come before you ever enter the role of the defendant. The instant you start explaining yourself, you cede initiative. Instead, as soon as the attack lands, respond with a question, a challenge, or a revelation that places them under the same scrutiny they intended for you. The brilliance of this tactic lies in how it manipulates audience perception. People instinctively side with the one who seems composed and in control. When you're asking the questions, you look like the investigator, the authority, the arbiter. When your opponent is answering, they appear subordinate, reactive, even guilty. The psychological pressure of being on the defensive cannot be overstated. It breeds mistakes. Flustered opponents will over-explain, contradict themselves, or reveal information they should have kept hidden. Your role, then, is to give them just enough rope, through pointed questions or well-timed observations, to let them entangle themselves. In politics, corporate disputes, or even personal conflicts, those who master this tactic can dismantle reputations without ever appearing aggressive. The opponent's fall becomes self-inflicted, their energy consumed by the need to defend against accusations they never expected. This is not a strategy for the timid. It requires the confidence to let the opponent take center stage while you pull the strings from behind the curtain. You must remain poised, avoid overplaying your hand, and resist the temptation to gloat. The true power lies in letting the audience arrive at their own conclusion, that your opponent, not you, is the one under judgment. Machiavelli would remind us that power is rarely about truth. It is about control of perception. Forcing your opponent onto the defensive is a form of psychological dominance that turns their momentum into your leverage. They came to put you on trial. By the end, it is they who are begging for a verdict in their favor. In the game of power, offense and defense are not equal. The one who dictates the terms dictates the outcome. By mastering the art of forcing your opponent to defend themselves, you not only escape their trap, you make them wish they had never said it in the first place.